You've been trying so hard. You really have. You wake up early, you follow the morning routine, you read the books, listen to the podcasts, optimize your productivity, plan your goals. You're doing everything you're supposed to do. And yet somehow the harder you try, the more everything feels like pushing a boulder uphill. Your work feels forced, your creativity feels blocked, even your relaxation feels like another task on your to-do list. And somewhere deep inside, you wonder, why does everything feel like such a struggle? Welcome to Mind in Exile. And today I'm going to tell you something that might sound completely backwards. Something that goes against everything modern self-help culture tells you. The reason you're struggling isn't because you're not trying hard enough. It's because you're trying too hard. And there's an ancient philosophy, thousands of years old, that understood this paradox better than any modern productivity guru. It's called Taoism, and it has a concept that could completely change how you approach everything in your life. It's called Wu Wei, and it means, roughly translated, effortless action, or as I like to call it, the art of trying without trying. Now, before you roll your eyes and think this is going to be some mystical woo-woo nonsense, let me tell you a story. A very relatable, very modern story about learning to drive. Remember when you first got behind the wheel of a car? If you're old enough to drive, you remember. You're gripping the steering wheel so tight your knuckles turn white. You're hyper-aware of every movement. Hands at 10 and 2. Check the mirrors. Signal. Check blind spot. Brake gently. Accelerate smoothly. Turn the wheel just the right amount. You're thinking about everything. Every single movement is deliberate, conscious, effortful. And what happens? You stall the car. You jerk forward. You brake too hard. You can't quite get the feel of it because you're trying too hard. But then, after weeks or months of practice, something shifts. You get in the car and you just drive. You're not thinking about your hands on the wheel. You're not consciously checking every mirror. You're not calculating how much pressure to put on the pedals. You're just driving. And somehow, paradoxically, you're driving better than when you were trying so hard. The actions flow. They're effortless. You're in what we call the zone, or what psychologists call the flow state, or what the ancient Taoists would call Wu Wei. And here's what's fascinating. This doesn't just apply to driving. It applies to everything. Sports, music, art, conversation, work, even relationships. The times when you perform your best, when you're most creative, most productive, most present, are the times when you're not forcing it, when you're not overthinking it, when you're just in the flow. But our modern world has completely forgotten this. We've been taught that success requires constant effort, constant pushing, constant striving. Hustle culture tells you to grind, to optimize every minute, to never stop improving. And yeah, there's a place for discipline and hard work. I'm not saying you should just sit on the couch and wait for success to come to you. But there's a difference between effort and force, between discipline and struggle, between action and friction. The Taoists understood something profound about nature. They watched water flowing down a river. Does water try to flow? Does it force itself around rocks? Does it struggle and strain to reach the ocean? No, it just flows. It takes the path of least resistance. And yet over time, water carves through stone, not through force, but through persistence and natural flow. The river doesn't wake up every morning and set goals for how much terrain it's going to cover. It just flows, and it gets there anyway. This is Wu Wei. Effortless action, natural flow, doing without forcing. And the beautiful thing is, when you understand this principle, it doesn't mean you become passive or lazy. It means you become more effective, because you're working with reality instead of against it. You're swimming with the current instead of exhausting yourself swimming against it. Now let's talk about what actually happens in your brain and body when you enter this state of flow, because it's not magic, it's psychology. When you're in flow, something fascinating occurs. Your sense of self temporarily disappears. That constant narrator in your head, the one that's always judging, analyzing, worrying about how you're doing, that voice goes quiet. You stop being self-conscious. You're not watching yourself perform. You are the performance. Time does this weird thing too. Sometimes it speeds up. You sit down to work on something and suddenly 3 hours have passed and it felt like 20 minutes. Other times it slows down. Athletes talk about this all the time. A basketball player in the zone says the basket looks bigger. A tennis player says the ball seems to slow down. It's not that time actually changes. It's that your perception of time changes because you're so present, so absorbed that you're experiencing reality at a different level. And here's the paradox. This state, this flow state, it's simultaneously highly focused and deeply relaxed. You're concentrating intensely on what you're doing, but there's no tension in it, no strain. It's focused relaxation, or relaxed focus, which sounds like a contradiction, but it's not. Think about a cat stalking prey, completely focused, every muscle ready, but there's no tension. It's alert relaxation. That's flow. Now, the opposite of flow, what psychologists call psychic entropy, is what most people experience most of the time. It's that scattered, distracted, chaotic mental state where you're trying to do 10 things at once and not really doing any of them well. You're working, but also checking your phone. You're in a conversation, but also thinking about what you need to do later. You're watching a movie, but also scrolling social media. Your attention is fragmented, your energy is dissipated, and you end the day exhausted, even though you didn't really accomplish anything significant. And modern life is basically designed to create this state. Constant notifications, endless information, multitasking rewarded as a skill, the glorification of being busy. We've created a world where sustained focus, where true presence, where flow is almost impossible. And then we wonder why we're all anxious and depressed and feeling like we're not living up to our potential. The Taoists would look at our modern world and probably just laugh or cry, because we've built a civilization that fights against natural flow at every turn. We've scheduled our lives down to the minute. We've turned everything into a task that needs to be optimized. We've made even our leisure activities feel like work. Netflix asks, "Are you still watching?" Like it's judging you for taking time to rest. Our fitness trackers scold us if we don't hit our steps. Even meditation apps have streaks and achievements. We've gamified everything to the point where nothing is just allowed to be. But here's the thing. You can't force flow. That's the whole point. The more you try to achieve it, the more it eludes you. It's like trying to fall asleep. The harder you try, the more awake you become. Or trying to remember something. The harder you grasp for it, the further away it gets. Flow is something you allow, not something you create. You create the conditions for it, and then you let go. So what are those conditions? Well, first, you need to be doing something you're genuinely engaged with. Something that interests you, not something you think you should be interested in, not something that looks good on your resume, something that actually captures your attention naturally. Because flow requires voluntary focus. If you're forcing yourself to focus, that's not flow, that's just discipline. Which has its place, sure, but it's not the same thing. Second, there needs to be a balance between challenge and skill. If something is too easy, you get bored. Your mind wanders, there's no engagement. But if something is too hard, you get anxious, you tense up, you start overthinking, you try too hard. Flow lives in that sweet spot where the task is challenging enough to require your full attention, but not so challenging that you're overwhelmed. It's like Goldilocks. Not too hard, not too easy, but just right. And here's something interesting. As you develop skill, you need to increase the challenge to stay in flow. That's why beginners can enter flow more easily sometimes. Everything is new and challenging, but as you get better, you need to push yourself a bit to maintain that edge. Not so much that you're stressed, but enough that you're engaged. It's a constantly moving target. Third, you need clear goals and immediate feedback, not long-term goals necessarily, but in the moment goals. A musician has immediate feedback. They can hear if they hit the right note. An athlete has immediate feedback. They can feel if the movement was right. A video gamer has immediate feedback. The game tells them instantly if they succeeded or failed. This creates a closed loop. You act, you get feedback, you adjust, you act again. And in that loop, flow can emerge. But most of modern work doesn't have this. You're working on some project where you won't know if it succeeded for months. You're sending emails where you don't know if they had the desired effect. You're creating content where the feedback is delayed and filtered and often contradictory. This makes flow harder to achieve, which is why a lot of knowledge workers struggle to find flow in their work. The feedback loop is too long and too ambiguous. Fourth, and this is huge, you need to be able to focus, which means you need to eliminate distractions. And I know everyone says this, but do you actually do it? When was the last time you worked on something with your phone in another room? Not just silenced, not just face down, in another room. When was the last time you had a conversation with someone without glancing at your phone once? When was the last time you watched a movie or read a book without also doing something else? We've trained ourselves to be constantly distracted, and then we wonder why we can't focus. It's like, I don't know, eating junk food every day and wondering why you feel sluggish. You've conditioned yourself for distraction, and now focus feels uncomfortable, unnatural even. But focus is your natural state. Distraction is what's unnatural. A child playing doesn't need to be taught to focus. They're naturally absorbed in what they're doing. We've just trained ourselves out of it. The Taoist masters would often talk about returning to the natural state, not achieving some advanced spiritual state, but returning. Going back to what you already were before society, culture, and conditioning taught you to be something else. And I think that applies here. You don't need to learn how to enter flow. You need to unlearn the habits that keep you from it. You need to strip away the layers of overthinking, of self-consciousness, of forcing, of trying too hard. And underneath all that, flow is already there, waiting. There's this story in Taoism about a butcher who was so skilled that his knife never dulled. Someone asked him how this was possible, and he said, "I don't cut through the bones. I find the spaces between them. My knife follows the natural structure of the animal. I don't force it. And because I don't force it, there's no resistance. And because there's no resistance, my knife never dulls." That's Wu Wei. That's effortless action, not avoiding the work, not taking shortcuts, but finding the natural path through the work where there's minimal resistance, where effort doesn't feel like struggle, where action feels like flow. And you've experienced this, maybe not often, maybe not recently, but you've experienced it. Think about a time when you were so absorbed in something that everything else disappeared. Maybe you were playing music, maybe you were writing, maybe you were having a deep conversation, maybe you were playing a sport or a video game. Whatever it was, you weren't thinking about yourself. You weren't worried about how you were doing. You weren't planning the next move. You were just there, present, flowing. And it felt, effortless, natural, right? That's your natural state. That's what life feels like when you're not in your own way, when you're not overthinking, when you're not forcing, when you're just allowing what wants to happen through you. And here's the beautiful part. The more you experience this, the more you start to recognize the conditions that allow it. You start to notice, when I'm trying too hard, flow disappears. When I'm worried about how I'm doing, flow disappears. When I'm distracted, flow disappears. But when I'm just present with what I'm doing, when I'm engaged but not attached to the outcome, when I'm focused but relaxed, flow emerges. And over time, you get better at creating those conditions, not forcing flow, but inviting it, allowing it, becoming a space where flow can happen. This is mind in exile. And maybe the exile is necessary. Maybe you need to step away from the hustle, from the constant striving, from the cultural belief that more effort always equals better results. Maybe you need to remember that you're part of nature, and nature doesn't force. Water doesn't try to be water. Trees don't try to grow. Birds don't try to fly. They just do what they do, effortlessly, naturally. And they do it perfectly. You're the same. When you stop trying to be something and just allow yourself to be, when you stop forcing and start flowing, everything becomes easier. Not because the tasks changed, but because you changed your relationship to them. You stopped fighting reality and started moving with it. So here's my challenge to you. Not really a challenge, more like an invitation, an experiment. Pick one thing this week, something you do regularly. And instead of trying hard at it, try soft. Instead of forcing, allow. Instead of gripping tight, hold loosely. And see what happens. Maybe it's a work project, maybe it's a conversation, maybe it's a workout, maybe it's just washing the dishes. Whatever it is, do it with focused relaxation. Present but not tense, engaged but not attached. And notice. Notice if it feels different. Notice if you perform differently. Notice if time does that weird thing where it seems to slow down or speed up. Notice if that voice in your head gets quieter. Notice if you find yourself, even just for a moment, in the flow, in the zone, in Wu Wei, in that space where action happens through you rather than by you. Because that's what the ancient Taoists discovered thousands of years ago. and it's what modern psychology is only now beginning to understand. That the secret to excellence, to creativity, to productivity, to satisfaction isn't trying harder, it's trying less. Or more accurately, it's finding that paradoxical state where effort becomes effortless, where discipline becomes flow, where work becomes play. The river doesn't struggle to reach the ocean, it just flows. And it gets there every time. Maybe it's time you did the same.